This is section 1.3, day 2, and today we're going to take what we were doing with graphs yesterday, and we're going to move into something called a piecewise graph. And a piecewise function is really just a function made up of two or more graphs. A function made up of two or more equations. So instead of maybe graphing just one equation at a time, as you can see here, we've got two equations at a time. And you can have several more than that. The most we'll ever do is 3, but this first example, actually all the examples we do today just have 2 in them. And the difference, or the thing that makes piecewise is you're only going to look at parts of the graph. So imagine we were graphing like a line, and piecewise just says you might only look at this part of the line, just that part right there. Or maybe if you were graphing a parabola, maybe you're only going to look at this portion right here. So your piecewise function is just going to take your whole function and you're just going to shrink it down and only look at the parts you want to look at. So for this first one, it says that we have the equation x plus 1 when x is greater than or equal to 0. So this function only happens if x is greater than or equal to 0. So one way I teach students to do this is we're just going to make an XY chart, old school, and we're going to start it at 0, and we're going to do everything greater than that. So 1, 2, 3. And that XY chart, if I design it that way, is going to give me just the points I want, just to graph the function for just the pieces I want. So this line exists, you know, going in both directions forever, but we only want to look at it when it's greater than or equal to 0. So imagine I have graphed the whole line and I'm just going to cut it off and we're only going to look from 0 on. So if I start my XY chart with just 0 and go greater than, then I'm only looking at the values that I want in the first place. So if we put a 0 in there, 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, and 4. And then I'm just going to plot those. So 0, 1. And this is greater than or equal to, so I'm going to put a filled in circle there. 1, 2, 2, 3, and 3, 4. And I'm going to connect them in that order, and that is my line. Now the rest of this line does exist. We know that, you know, that's just a slope of 1 up 1. So that's where the whole line is, but this is telling me you only get to look at it from 0 and on. So making my XY chart like that, and I connect them in that order from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, and then I finish my arrow off saying, and then everything in that direction. I'm going to do the same thing for the other equation. I'm going to make an XY chart for it. That was a bad arrow. This one says I'm also going to do everything less than 0. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm actually going to go less than. And then I will always have students ask me, they say, you know what, that says less than 0, so why don't we start at -1? So here's why. When you were little and you learned all about number lines, and this is 0, if I said please graph x is greater than 0, you would not have gone over to 1 and said, okay, I'm going to start there. We start at 0 because we want every decimal that's in here. So we want 0.1 and we want 0.5 and 0.75. So we start at that number, but with an open circle saying I don't want that, I just want everything right after that. So we still want to start at whatever that number is, but when we go to graph it, this one will have an open circle. So 0 and a -0 will still be 0, a -1, but a -1 will be positive. If I put -2 in there, a -2 would be positive. So it's just turning all my numbers positive. So I'm going to start with 0, 0, and that's going to be an open circle. And then I've got -1, 1, -2, 2, and -3, 3. And I connect them in that order. So from 0 to -1, -2, -3. And there is my first piecewise function. So just two pieces, parts of functions, together in one graph to look like a function. Now, like we've talked in the past, this is still a piecewise function, which means it has to pass the vertical line test. So make sure that when you get done graphing this, you don't accidentally have 2 filled in dots. That would not be okay. Or that you have, hold on, I need my scratch paper back. Or make sure that you do not have like your 2 equations stacked on top of each other. I can't hit it twice with a vertical line. So just watch when you're done that it still is an actual function. And now we're going to do the domain and range of this function. So domain is still, we're going to start from the left and we're going to roll our pencil, and that arrow is going all the way up and all the way over, so my domain is going to start at negative infinity. And as I roll my pencil this way, it looks like I'm touching everything. I could draw a vertical line all the time until I get to here and I've got this open circle, which means there's nothing there, except I also have a filled in circle above it. So that means that when my pencil rolls to 0, I actually do touch the function. I know there's nothing there, but there is something there. So I am touching 0, so I can actually keep rolling my pencil, and that arrow says we go all the way up and all the way out, so that is negative infinity to infinity, or you could write all real numbers. For range, remember we start at the bottom, and the first time my pencil actually hits anything is at 0, except that's an open circle. So we just want to do a 0 with a parenthesis because that's not included. I can't use 0. And then as I roll up, it looks like my pencil would touch horizontally, would always be touching the function after that. And for horizontal, it's okay that it hits it twice. So like here, I'm going to hit it twice. I'm going to hit it twice all the way up. And these arrows are going up forever, which means it's going to infinity. You could also say it's just all the positive real numbers. Next one, I'm still going to suggest that you always use two XY charts, one for each of the equations. And you always set it up starting at this number and then going away from whatever it said. So the first one we're going to do is going to be right here. We're going to do an XY chart. It says that it should be everything greater than 1. So we're going to start at 1 and we're going to go greater. If I plug a 1 in here, negative 1 plus 3 would be 2. Negative 2 plus 3 would be 1. Negative 3 plus 3 would be 0. And negative 4 plus 3 would be negative 1. So I'm going to plot those, and this is an open circle. So my first one is open at 1, 2, and then closed at 2, 1, because we're just going to connect these in that order. There's my first one. Second XY chart. I'm going to start at 0. This says go less than, so everything less than that. I'm going to start with 0. 0 times a half is still 0, minus 1. Negative 1 times a half, so that's negative half. Minus 1 will be negative 1 and a half. Negative 2 cut in half is negative 1, and negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. And negative 3 times a half, and then minus 1 will be negative 2.5. So I'm going to plot those. Again, this guy gets an open circle. So at 0, negative 1, I have an open circle. And then negative 1, 1.5, negative 2, negative 2, negative 3, negative 2.5. Connect them in that order, and there's your function. Domain and range, we're going to roll our pencil. So I'm going to start with the way left, and that arrow's going forever, so I'm definitely a negative infinity. Here we're going to run into a problem. My pencil can roll all the way up until 0. And unlike the last one, where we had a hole but then we had it filled in so we could keep going, this one has a hole and there is no filled in on 0. So 0 is actually a place where I have to stop and essentially pick up my pencil because there's no more function for me to keep following. I kind of just stopped here and there was no filled in dot for me to jump to. So as I roll my pencil, the next place I have any information, remember this is x values, so we're looking up and down, is at 1. And 1 is again an open circle. So it gets a parenthesis as well because I can't include it. And then as I keep rolling my pencil is going to go forever. That arrow is going forever. So I'm going to infinity. So I kind of had this weird break in the middle where I had to stop at one number and pick it up at another because there's this whole gap between these two. Range, I'm going to start as low as I can, and those arrows are going down forever, so that's negative infinity. And if I roll my pencil, remember you're just checking for horizontal just as long as you hit. And here's your open, but if you go over here, you also have a filled in, so you can keep going. So horizontally, it looks like we go all the way up until 2. And I cannot include 2 because it's open. So that's one way to write this. You could write it. You could also say that y is just everything less than 2. So you start at 2 and just everything below. We got 2 more to go. The top XY chart, we'll start at -1, and we're supposed to be doing everything less than. I'm just going to do 3 numbers total this time. 3 is enough for you to connect. As long as the 3 are in a line, you should be good to go. I just was starting with 4. I'm not actually sure why. So starting with -1, -1 minus 1 is -2. -2 minus 1 is -3, and -3 minus 1 is -4. So we're going to start plotting these. This one is an open circle. So my first bubble is an open circle at -1, -2. Then I got -2, -3, and -3, -4. So connecting in that order, that's where my function's going for that part. The other equation, oh, very weird, it just says -2. Keep in mind that f of x is just y, so what you really have is just y equals -2, and we've talked about how to graph those before. That's just a horizontal line through y at -2. You only get everything greater than or equal to 0, so we'll start at 0, 1, 2, and no matter what you do, everything you plug in, oops, sorry, it's -2. So 0, -2, filled in. 1, -2, 2, -2, it just looks like that. Just a horizontal line at -2. Domain, starting as left as you can, that arrow's going down and out forever, so it starts at -infinity. And your pencil kind of rolls all the way until you hit -1. You have that open circle again, and unfortunately there's no filled in circle to save you. So you stop at -1. And then the next time you start up is at 0. And this time it's filled in, so we're going to change that to a bracket. So this means not included, open circle. This means value is included, closed circle. And then that arrow is going forever, so it's going to go all the way to infinity. Range value, we're going to start as low as we can, so that's going to go down as far as it can go, which is -infinity. And my pencil is going to roll all the way up until -2. There's no arrow sending me up beyond that. -2 is just as far as I can get. Going vertically, that horizontal line is just going to keep going at -2, so there's no gain there. And I do get to put a bracket there because I am filled in and I have all of this data at -2. Another way to write it is you could say y is everything less than or equal to -2. One more to go. We're going to do another one of these where it's just a number, and then we're going to do a parabola. So this one, XY chart, says you only get to pick numbers from -4 to -1. They're actually telling you these are the only numbers you get to pick. So -4, -3, -2, and -1. That's it. I only get the values in between there. And no matter what I pick, it's always going to be a 3. There's no slope to that. It's just a horizontal line. Remember, y equals 3. So -4, 3, open circle. -3, 3. At -1, you are a +3, but also it's an open circle. They are both less thans. And you're just filling in what's in between. So that's an interesting situation. 2 open circles and then connected. So those are the only values you can look at. The other one is a parabola, and it's only happening for everything greater than -1. So we'll start at -1, and then we'll go 0, and then 1. So if I plug a -1 in there, -1 squared is +1, 0 squared is still 0, and 1 squared is 1. And our first bubble is going to be filled in because it's greater than or equal to. So -1, +1 is filled in. Then we've got 0, 0. Then we've got 1, 1. If you don't quite remember how a parabola looks, you might want one more number. So if I plug in a 2, I would get 4. And right there. So we've got kind of that bowl, that U shape. And I'm going to throw an arrow on the end. And now we're going to do our domain and range. So our domain actually doesn't get to start at -infinity like all these others. This is as far left as we can go, and that's -4. And it is a parenthesis because that's an open circle. I can't include it. So if I roll my pencil, I kind of run into what looks like a problem because I've got an open circle, but then I've got a filled in one to take care of it. So I keep going, and looks like my pencil is going to roll from there for forever. So I could write that. I could also say x is going to be greater than -4. The range, then we're going to start at the lowest value possible, and for us that's going to be 0 this time. That's as low as we can go. And we get to include it because there is an actual dot there. I have actual data at 0, which means that that's included. And as I roll my pencil up, it kind of looks like, oh my gosh, we have open circles, that's going to be a problem. But remember, for range horizontally, as long as you can hit the function multiple times. So these are filled in, all these dots in here, this is filled in, so I really don't even care about those open circles. And looks like I'm going up forever. And I could also call this all positive real numbers. So that is your introduction to piecewise functions. I would always make 2 XY charts, one for each one. Start at the number you were given and then go in the direction it's telling you to. And then as you plot them, just connect them right in that order, and then you'll have your function.